Unexplained phenomena the officer's unseen war. They tell you the job is about the scene, the perp in the alley, the traffic stop gone wrong, the domestic dispute. But what they don't brief you on are the calls that make the hair on your neck stand up, the ones where the evidence vanishes and the only record is the imprint on your mind. We deal with threats that don't show up on radar, and for those, there is no existing report, only the cold, hard truth you can never officially file. The hum of the cruiser's engine was a familiar lullaby, a constant companion through the predictable ebb and flow of Officer Anya Sharma's graveyard shift. Rain slicked the asphalt of Elmwood, blurring the neon signs of the few businesses still open into watercolor streaks. It was 0230 hours, a time when the city exhaled its last breath of manufactured calm before the pre-dawn stirrings. Sharma adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, the worn leather smooth beneath her gloved fingers. Her partner, Officer Ben Carter, a man whose quiet efficiency bordered on the unnerving, was asleep in the passenger seat, his breathing a soft counterpoint to the radio chatter. The dispatch crackled, a voice tinny with static and weariness. Unit 7, respond to 1412, Oak Street for a noise complaint. Neighbor reports sustained, high-frequency auditory disturbances. Advised to approach with caution. Sharma felt a familiar flicker of professional detachment. Noise complaints were rarely exciting. Usually, it was a neighbor with too much to drink, a faulty appliance, or a teenager experimenting with bass. High-frequency auditory disturbances, however, was an unusual descriptor. She nudged Carter awake. "Ben, we got a call." "Oak Street, weird noise." Carter's eyes, a startling shade of gray, opened slowly. He straightened in his seat, his movements economical. "Auditory disturbances? Sounds like a party pooper's paradise." "Or something worse," Sharma murmured, turning the cruiser onto Oak Street. The houses here were older, their architecture a testament to a bygone era, now shadowed and silent under the perpetual damp. Number 1412 was a Victorian, its gables silhouetted against the bruised sky. No lights were visible from the street, which was odd for a complaint involving a sustained disturbance. As they pulled to a stop across the street, the silence itself seemed to press in. The rain had softened to a mist, and the only sound was the distant sigh of wind through the ancient oak trees lining the avenue. Then, it began. A sound that wasn't a sound, not precisely. It was a pressure, a vibrating in the bones, a high-pitched keening that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't loud, but it was pervasive, an internal scream that bypassed the ears and lodged itself directly into the skull. Sharma instinctively reached for her service weapon, her training kicking in despite the absurdity of the sensation. Carter was already out of the car, his posture tense, his eyes scanning the darkened facade of the house. He held up a hand, a silent signal to wait. "Dispatch," Sharma keyed her mic, her voice tighter than she liked. "Unit 7 at 1412, Oak Street. We are observing the location. Requesting clarification on the nature of the reported disturbance. It's not standard." The dispatcher's voice was laced with a subtle unease. "Unit 7, report indicates the complainant, a Mrs. Gable, described it as 1,000 needles in your brain. She has been complaining for 3 nights now. Patrol has responded twice, found nothing out of the ordinary. Last night, she reported it was louder than ever before." Sharma swallowed. Needles in the brain. She felt it now, a dull throb behind her eyes, a tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with the cold. The keening intensified, a shimmering wave of discomfort washing over them. Carter made a small, sharp sound, a choked exhalation. "Ben?" Sharma asked, her voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the house. "Did you see that?" Sharma followed his line of sight. In the upper-story window, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness. It wasn't the solid shape of a person, but something more fluid, more amorphous, like smoke coalescing into a vaguely humanoid form. It lingered for a moment, then dissolved back into the night. "What the hell was that?" Sharma breathed, her hand tightening on her sidearm. Carter didn't answer. The keening reached a crescendo, a piercing whine that felt like it was tearing the very air apart. It wasn't just a noise anymore, it was a physical force, pushing against them, against the cruiser, against the very reality they understood. Sharma felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to flee, to put as much distance as possible between herself and this impossible sound. But duty held her rooted. "Dispatch," Sharma forced out, her voice strained. "We have a visual. Unidentified entity. Requesting immediate backup. Priority Alpha." She fumbled with the microphone, her fingers numb, the keening making it impossible to think. The world around them seemed to warp, the streetlights flickering erratically, the mist swirling with an unnatural energy. Carter raised his weapon, his expression grim. "Anya, get back in the car. Now." But as Sharma turned, the keening abruptly cut off. The silence that followed was even more profound, more terrifying than the noise. The pressure in her skull vanished, leaving behind a hollow ache. The shadows in the window were just shadows again. The streetlights steadied. The rain had stopped. It was as if nothing had happened. Carter lowered his weapon, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at Sharma, his usual composure shattered. Did we just imagine that?" Sharma shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the darkened house. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that they hadn't imagined it. The echoes of that sound, the lingering imprint of that impossible shape, were seared into her mind. This was no ordinary noise complaint. This was something else. Something that didn't fit on any incident report. The chill of the late-night air had long since seeped through the cruiser's thin insulation. Officer Ben Carter had been on stakeout for what felt like an eternity, parked discreetly on a side street overlooking a warehouse district notorious for its late-night illicit activities. The target a known fence, suspected of dealing in stolen high-value electronics. Carter, a man of quiet observation and meticulous routine, found a strange comfort in the predictable rhythm of surveillance. The soft glow of his dashboard instruments, the distant drone of city traffic, the occasional flicker of a security light on a distant building, these were the elements of his world, solid and understandable. He checked his watch. 0317 hours. The target property remained dark, a monolithic shadow against the starless sky. Carter adjusted his position, the worn seat of the cruiser groaning softly. Had been monitoring a constant stream of encrypted communications for the past 4 hours, all of it leading to this moment. His dashcam, a silent witness to countless patrols and minor incidents, was recording dutifully, its red indicator light a small point of assurance in the enveloping darkness. Suddenly, the world outside the cruiser's windows began to stutter. The distant security lights flickered violently, then died, plunging a wide swath of the warehouse district into an even deeper gloom. Simultaneously, the dashboard instruments went haywire. The speedometer needle swung wildly, the fuel gauge dropped to empty and then slammed back to full, and the radio emitted a burst of static so intense it made Carter flinch. His laptop, which had been displaying a steady feed of data, froze, the cursor blinking with an almost mocking insistence. Carter felt a prickle of unease, a deviation from the accepted parameters of his profession. This wasn't a power surge, it was a localized, systemic failure. He reached for his sidearm, his movements practiced and fluid, though his mind raced. He keyed his mic, the static now a maddening hiss. "Dispatch, this is Unit 45. Experiencing severe electronic malfunction. All systems down. Repeat, all systems down. Dashcam recording anomaly." He looked at the dashcam's small screen. Instead of the expected view of the darkened street, it displayed a chaotic maelstrom of static, a blizzard of white noise. But within that blizzard, something flickered. A shape. It was difficult to discern, indistinct and fluid, like oil on water, yet possessing a certain geometry that defied logic. It pulsed, not with light, but with an absence of it, a void that seemed to suck in the very visual information on the screen. Carter leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't a reflection, not a trick of the light. It was a presence, alien and profoundly wrong. The visual anomaly was accompanied by a subtle shift in the ambient noise. Or rather, a lack of it. The city's usual nocturnal symphony had ceased entirely. No distant sirens, no hum of machinery, not even the rustle of leaves. An unnatural silence had fallen, a vacuum that felt heavier than any sound. Carter could feel it, a pressure in his ears, a dull ache behind his eyes, reminiscent of the unsettling experience on Oak Street, though far more subtle, more insidious. He tried to maintain his professional detachment, to categorize and analyze. But the image on the dashcam screen was a violation of everything he understood about optics, about physics. It was a rupture in the fabric of perception. The void on the screen seemed to expand, to reach out, and for a terrifying moment, Carter felt an inexplicable dread, a primal fear that transcended his training. He instinctively flinched away from the screen, his hand instinctively covering his eyes. When he dared to look again, the chaotic static had resolved into a faint, distorted image. The warehouse district was there, but subtly altered. The shadows were deeper, the angles sharper, as if reality itself had been momentarily reshaped. And then, he saw it, or rather, he felt it. A fleeting impression, a movement at the periphery of the camera's view. Not a solid form, but a disturbance, a ripple in the visual field, like heat haze but cold, impossibly cold. It was there for an instant, then gone, leaving behind only the residual static. Carter sat back, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He removed the memory card from the dashcam, his hands trembling slightly. The event was too anomalous, too significant, to be dismissed or explained away by a simple equipment malfunction. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever he had witnessed, whatever had briefly manifested on that street, was beyond the scope of standard police procedure. This wasn't about catching a fence anymore. It was about something far more profound and far more dangerous. The stretch of Highway 17 leading out of the city was a ribbon of asphalt that unwound into a desolate expanse of scrubland and skeletal trees. Sergeant Jianli navigated the winding road with practiced ease, the cruiser's headlights cutting through the pre-dawn murk. His dispatcher's voice, usually a calm drone, had held an edge of bewilderment when relaying the call, a distress signal originating from a vehicle in an area with no cell coverage and miles from any habitation. The transmission had been broken, garbled, but the urgency was unmistakable. As Lee approached the coordinates, the air grew heavy, thick with an unsettling stillness that the wind couldn't seem to penetrate. The signal led him to a place where the highway narrowed, the shoulder crumbling into a steep embankment. There, bathed in the stark white beams of his headlights, was a vehicle. A sleek, modern sedan, incongruous against the rugged landscape. It sat at an odd angle, as if it had simply ceased to be in motion, its hazard lights blinking rhythmically, a lonely pulse in the oppressive silence. Lee killed the engine and the cruiser's lights, plunging the scene into a deeper darkness, broken only by the strobing hazard lights of the abandoned sedan. He grabbed his flashlight and tactical gear, his senses on high alert. The silence was absolute, a void that seemed to swallow sound. Even the crunch of gravel beneath his boots felt unnaturally loud. He approached the vehicle cautiously, his hand resting on the butt of his service weapon. The doors were unlocked. The driver's side was empty, the seat pushed back as if the occupant had simply stood up and walked away. The passenger door revealed the same. No signs of struggle, no overturned contents, no blood. It was as if the occupants had evaporated. Lee swept his flashlight beam over the interior. The dashboard was dark, the radio silent. The air inside the car was noticeably colder than the outside temperature, a distinct and chilling drop. He noticed something peculiar on the driver's side floor mat. A fine, crystalline dust, shimmering faintly under his flashlight. He knelt, careful not to disturb it, and activated his portable environmental scanner. The readings were immediately nonsensical. Ambient temperature 4 degrees Celsius. Inside the vehicle 18 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric pressure nominal. But then the scanner's display flickered, displaying readings that made no sense. Trace amounts of exotic isotopes not found in nature, anomalous magnetic field fluctuations, and a baffling energy signature that the device couldn't categorize. Lee straightened, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. This was beyond anything he'd encountered in his 15 years on the force. He pulled out his secondary scanner, a more specialized unit used for hazardous materials. The results were even more disturbing. The crystalline dust registered no known chemical composition. It was inert, yet it seemed to absorb light, to deaden sound. He carefully bagged a sample, his movements deliberate and precise, the ingrained habits of procedure battling against the encroaching disbelief. He then examined the exterior of the vehicle. There were no tire marks leading to its position, no evidence of a struggle or a collision. Yet, the sedan was parked at an angle that suggested a sudden, forceful stop. As he circled the vehicle, his flashlight beam caught something on the rear bumper. A faint, almost imperceptible etching, unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't a scratch or a dent, but a pattern, intricate and alien, that seemed to shimmer and shift as he moved the light. Lee activated his radio, the static a welcome intrusion in the suffocating quiet. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Lee. I am at the location of the distress signal. I have located an abandoned vehicle, a silver sedan, no occupants. The scene presents unusual circumstances. Requesting additional units and a hazmat team. Also, inform Precinct Command this is an unclassified incident. I have no designation for this." He paused, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The evidence here doesn't conform to any known parameters. The dispatcher's voice, when it finally responded, was tinged with the same bewilderment Lee felt. "Sergeant, can you clarify unclassified? We have no protocols for." Lee cut him off, his gaze sweeping over the desolate landscape, the unnerving stillness. "Just send them. And tell them to bring everything they have. We're dealing with something outside the manual." He knew, as he spoke, that no manual existed for what he was witnessing. Sector 7G was a relic, a skeletal graveyard of forgotten industry clinging to the city's periphery. Rusting corrugated metal buildings slumped like tired giants, their windows vacant eyes staring out at a world that had long since moved on. For weeks, rumors had circulated through the precinct, whispers of missing persons, not runaways or petty criminals, but people who had simply vanished without a trace. The common thread: they had all been last seen near or within the confines of Sector 7G. Officer Maria Rodriguez, a sharp, pragmatic officer with an unshakable resolve, had been assigned the unofficial lead on the developing pattern. Her first foray into the sector was on a Tuesday afternoon, the sky an indifferent gray. As she drove her patrol car down the cracked asphalt road that served as the sector's main artery, the usual urban din, the distant sirens, the rumble of traffic, the drone of aircraft, simply ceased. It wasn't a gradual fading, it was an abrupt, jarring absence. The silence was profound, deeper than any soundproofed room, a palpable entity that pressed in on her, stealing her breath. Her radio, which had been relaying routine traffic, went dead. Not static, not a loss of signal, but an inert silence, as if the very air had absorbed its electronic pulse. Rodriguez stopped the cruiser. She killed the engine, and the silence intensified, pressing against her eardrums. Even the tire's gentle hiss on the pavement seemed to be swallowed by the void. She stepped out of the car, her boots crunching on debris, the sound alien and intrusive. Her senses, honed by years of policing, screamed that something was fundamentally wrong. The air was unnaturally still, devoid of even the faintest breeze, yet it carried a peculiar chill, an unnatural cold that seemed to emanate not from the temperature, but from within the very fabric of the place. She spotted a figure huddled near the entrance of a derelict processing plant, a man whose gaunt features and wide eyes spoke of profound fear. He was a vagrant, a fixture in the less savory parts of the city, but Rodriguez had never seen him this terrified. As she approached, he gestured wildly, his voice a hoarse whisper, barely audible against the oppressive quiet. They just take them," he stammered, his gaze darting around the empty lot. "1 minute they're there, the next gone. Like smoke." He shuddered, pulling his threadbare jacket tighter around himself. Saw one just a flicker. Like a shadow moving too fast. Then nothing. But the feeling, it's like being watched by something that isn't there. Rodriguez pressed him for details, for descriptions, for anything concrete. But the man's narrative was a jumble of fragmented sensations: the chilling cold, the oppressive silence, the fleeting glimpses of movement that were too quick to register, too ephemeral to describe. He spoke of a pervasive unease, a sense of being observed by an unseen presence that left him feeling hollowed out, drained. His account, like others she had reluctantly gathered from the few who dared to speak, offered no actionable intelligence, only a deepening sense of dread. She conducted a preliminary sweep of the immediate area. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating decaying machinery and piles of refuse. There were no signs of forced entry, no disturbed earth, no discarded belongings that might offer a clue. It was as if the missing persons had simply ceased to exist within the sector's boundaries. The psychological toll of this investigation was beginning to weigh on her. The constant, unnerving silence, the unnerving stillness, the vague, disquieting accounts from witnesses, it was a unique form of psychological warfare, an assault on rational thought. She felt a growing isolation, a sense that she was stepping into a reality divorced from logic, a place where the rules of the world she knew no longer applied. She logged the report, her own handwriting appearing strangely foreign on the page, an attempt to impose order on a situation that was fundamentally chaotic. The precinct, once a bastion of ordered chaos, began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like an extension of the unsettling cases that had been piling up. Officer Anya Sharma found herself double-checking the time on her watch with an unsettling frequency, a habit born from a persistent, almost imperceptible, temporal distortion she'd begun experiencing. Minutes would stretch into an impossible languor, only to snap back with jarring abruptness, leaving her disoriented. She'd dismissed it as fatigue, the byproduct of graveyard shifts and the lingering phantom sensations from the Oak Street incident. But then she noticed it in others. Sergeant Jianli, a man whose composure was as legendary as his efficiency, was observed staring intently at the empty space beside his desk for prolonged periods, a frown etched into his usually impassive features. When asked if he was all right, he'd simply shake his head, muttering about shadows that moved when he wasn't looking directly at them, fleeting movements that evaporated upon direct observation. His meticulous reports, once models of clarity, now contained curious annotations, cryptic phrases like auditory bleed-through and visual static, unconfirmed. Officer Ben Carter, the quiet observer, began exhibiting a nervous tic, a subtle twitch in his left eye that appeared whenever he was near the precinct's aging server room. He claimed the room felt colder than it should, and that sometimes, when the computers were under heavy load, the hum of their machinery seemed to warp, taking on a discordant, almost melodic quality. Had even taken to carrying a small, high-frequency sound dampener, a device head jury rigged himself, though he admitted it only offered marginal relief. The precinct's resident cynic, Detective Miles Corbin, usually quick with a sarcastic retort, had become uncharacteristically subdued. Had reported a recurring dream, vivid and disturbing, where he was pursued through endless, sterile corridors by something formless, something that whispered his name in a language he couldn't comprehend, yet instinctively understood as a threat. Had dismissed it as stress, but the recurring nature and the shared thematic elements with other officers' vague accounts were beginning to gnaw at his hardened skepticism. Even the dispatchers weren't immune. Calls would occasionally come through with faint, unsettling echoes, whispers that seemed to bypass the standard audio filters. A brief flicker in the fluorescent lights above the main floor, a chill that would sweep through the squad room on a windless day, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of ozone that would linger after an anomaly. These were not isolated incidents anymore. They were a pattern, insidious and undeniable, seeping into the very foundations of their workplace, a testament to the fact that whatever they had encountered in the field was not staying confined to the shadows and desolate highways. The precinct, a place built on the assumption of order and logical explanation, was beginning to hum with an unspoken dread. The officers, once united by a shared purpose, now found themselves bound by a new, terrifying secret, the growing suspicion that they were not alone in their own station. Detective Samuel Hayes ran a hand over his tired face, the stubble of familiar roughness against his palm. His desk was a testament to an unsolved string of disappearances, a chaotic monument to the inexplicable. For weeks, the precinct had been abuzz with hushed theories and nervous jokes, but Hayes, a man who trusted facts above all else, found himself increasingly adrift in a sea of unknowns. Then came the anonymous tip, a scrawled note slipped under his office door, a crude drawing of an eye within a triangle, and a single, chilling sentence: "They are not new. The old ones stir." It was signed only with a symbol that vaguely resembled a stylized raven. The note led him to Silas, an informant whose reputation preceded him, a man who trafficked in shadows, whispered secrets, and knowledge gleaned from sources best left unexamined. Silas operated on the fringes of society, his insights often dismissed as the ramblings of a madman, but Hayes, desperate for any thread of understanding, had agreed to meet. The rendezvous was set for the abandoned observatory on Blackwood Hill, a place where the city's light pollution surrendered to the vast, indifferent canvas of the night sky. Hayes arrived before Silas. The air atop the hill was crisp and carried the scent of pine. The observatory itself was a hulking, derelict structure, its dome cracked and gaping like a broken skull. He found Silas by a dying campfire, a wizened man whose eyes held a disconcerting depth, as if they had witnessed more than any mortal should. Silas offered Hayes a tin mug of something that smelled vaguely of burnt herds. "You look like a man who's seen things that don't belong," Silas rasped, his voice a dry rustle. "Things that slip through the cracks, the kind the boys in blue like to pretend don't exist." Hayes took a slow sip of the bitter brew. "I'm looking for answers, Silas. About the disappearances. About things that don't make sense." Silas' gaze drifted to the star-dusted sky. "Sense. That's the illusion, detective. We live in a world woven from threads we can perceive. But there are other threads, older, stronger, woven from realities we can only glimpse in our darkest hours, or our deepest fears." He gestured vaguely towards the heavens. "What you're seeing, what your colleagues are experiencing, it's not new. It's a reawakening." He spoke of entities that predated human civilization, beings that existed in dimensions adjacent to our own, capable of influencing our reality in subtle, terrifying ways. He called them the architects of silence, suggesting they operated on a scale of time and perception that dwarfed human comprehension. They didn't seek to conquer or destroy in the conventional sense. They merely rearranged, absorbing elements of our world, of our very existence, into their own unknowable tapestry. The disappearances, the anomalies, the sensory distortions, these were not random occurrences, but the ripples of their influence, the subtle adjustments they made to the fabric of our perception. "They don't use weapons, detective," Silas continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Their tools are perception, absence, distortion. They feed on the dissonance they create, on the fear that festers when understanding breaks down. The silence you've heard, the glitches in your machines that S them, adjusting the frequencies, finding the weak points in our perceived reality." Silas then produced a tattered, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. He carefully opened it, revealing intricate diagrams, faded astronomical charts, and unsettling glyphs that seemed to pulse with a faint energy. "This," he said, tapping a section filled with spiral patterns, "is how they are perceived by those who can look beyond the veil. It's not a form, detective. It's a manifestation. A scar on the continuum." He pointed to a symbol that bore a disturbing resemblance to the one etched on the sedan's bumper. "They have always been here, watching, waiting, occasionally reaching out. But something has changed. Something has drawn their attention, and they are more active now than they have been in centuries." Hayes listened, his mind struggling to reconcile Silas's cryptic pronouncements with his ingrained sense of logic. Yet, the corroboration was undeniable. The auditory disturbances, the electronic failures, the chilling silence, the fleeting shadows, they all aligned with Silas' terrifying narrative. This wasn't just a series of isolated incidents. It was a cohesive, albeit horrifying, picture. The threats were not random. They were orchestrated by an ancient, organized presence that existed just beyond the reach of normal human understanding. The dimly lit conference room felt more like a bunker than a precinct breathing space. The usual cacophony of precinct life, the ringing phones, the hurried footsteps, the muffled shouts, was absent, replaced by a palpable tension. Detective Samuel Hayes stood before a makeshift whiteboard, the cryptic symbols from Silas' journal sketched in stark white against the dark surface. Around the table sat Officer Anya Sharma, Sergeant Jen Lee, and Officer Maria Rodriguez, their faces grim, their shared experiences in the field having forged an unspoken bond of dread. Ben Carter was absent, his status still uncertain after his encounter in the warehouse district. "We can no longer operate under standard procedure," Hayes began, his voice low and steady, a practiced authority masking the undercurrent of apprehension. "The incidents at Oak Street, the warehouse anomaly, Sector 7G, they're not isolated. Silas' information, as unbelievable as it sounds, aligns with the patterns we've observed. We're dealing with something that doesn't fit any existing threat profile." He gestured to the whiteboard. "These aren't random occurrences. Silas refers to them as manifestations of entities he calls the architects of silence. Beings that operate beyond our sensory perception, capable of manipulating reality. The disappearances, the electronic failures, the temporal distortions, they're not side effects, they're instruments. Lee, ever the pragmatist, spoke up. Detective, with all due respect, entities beyond our perception doesn't exactly translate into actionable intel for a law enforcement agency. Which is precisely why we're here, Hayes countered, needing Lee's gaze. We've been tasked, unofficially, with a new directive. Think of it as Protocol Omega. It's not about making an arrest. It's about observation, containment, and, if necessary, survival. He outlined the plan, a convergence of their individual encounters. Intelligence suggested a heightened period of activity, a convergence point for these manifestations, predicted to occur within the next 48 hours. The location was still uncertain, but the pattern indicated a nexus of energy disturbances, a point where the veil between worlds was thinnest. Sharma, who had personally experienced the disorienting auditory phenomena, nodded slowly. So, we're looking for another impossible sound or a visual anomaly, but on a larger scale? Precisely, Hayes confirmed. And this time, we go in prepared. Not with standard-issue sidearms, but with modified equipment. Silas provided some guidance on materials that might disrupt their perceived influence. Faraday cages for electronics, specialized sonic emitters calibrated to specific frequencies, even basic reflective shielding. We're going to try and create a localized zone of stability, to observe without becoming absorbed. Rodriguez, who had felt the chilling silence of Sector 7G, voiced a concern. What if we can't contain it? What if it's not something we can simply shield ourselves from? Then we adapt, Hayes said, his gaze sweeping over each of them. We observe, we learn, and we ensure our own survival and the safety of any civilians caught in the crossfire. The objective is not apprehension that's beyond our current capability. It's about understanding the threat enough to mitigate its immediate impact. We document everything, even if it seems like nonsense. Because right now, nonsense is all we have. The plan was daring, unorthodox, and fraught with peril. They were not a specialized unit, they were a collection of officers thrust into a situation that defied all rational explanation. Yet, in their shared experiences, in the unnerving echoes that had begun to permeate their lives, they found a grim resolve. The training, the years of dedication to duty, were not for this, but they were all they had. As the meeting adjourned, a silent understanding passed between them. They were stepping into the unknown, armed with theories and makeshift defenses, ready to face a war that had no name, no precedent, and no official record. The air in the abandoned observatory crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with the approaching dawn. Protocol Omega was in motion, a desperate gambit born from the fragments of Silas' maddening knowledge. Detective Hayes, Sergeant Lee, and Officers Sharma and Rodriguez were positioned in a defensive perimeter, their makeshift equipment, salvaged Faraday cages, jury-rigged sonic emitters, and an assortment of reflective materials, arranged in a rough circle around the observatory's main dome. The objective to contain and observe, not to confront. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. The first sign was a shift in the ambient light. The stars, once sharp pinpricks in the inky blackness, began to blur, their light seeming to warp and stretch as if viewed through rippling water. Then came the silence, a profound absence of sound that was more terrifying than any noise. It wasn't just the city's distant hum that vanished, it was the rustle of leaves, the chirping of insects, even the sound of their own breathing seemed to be absorbed by the oppressive void. Sharma felt it first, a familiar pressure in her skull, a precursor to the auditory phenomena she'd encountered on Oak Street, but this time, it was amplified, a discordant symphony of silence. Lee checked his environmental scanner, the devices display a chaotic dance of meaningless data. Readings are off the charts, he reported, his voice strained, unnaturally loud in the void. Magnetic fields fluctuating wildly. Temperature dropping rapidly. A cloud of mist, impossibly dense and cold, began to coalesce in the center of the clearing, swirling with an unnatural luminescence that seemed to absorb, rather than emit, light. From within the mist, a shape began to form. It was not solid, not tangible, but a void within the void, a tear in the fabric of reality. It pulsed, a silent thrum that resonated deep within their bones, a sensation that spoke of immense power and utter indifference. Rodriguez instinctively raised her modified sonic emitter, a device designed to emit a specific frequency Silas believed might disrupt these entities. She activated it, and a high-pitched whine, barely audible to human ears, cut through the unnatural silence. The void seemed to recoil momentarily, its form rippling like disturbed water. But then, it began to expand. The mist swirled faster, and within the growing anomaly, fleeting impressions of movement began to appear. Not distinct figures, but suggestions, the ghosts of forms that flickered at the edge of vision, like afterimages burned onto the retina. Sharma saw them too, fleeting shapes that mirrored the shadow-like figures Shed glimpsed in Sector 7G, their movements impossibly fast, defying the laws of physics. Hayes, his hand never far from his sidearm, scanned the perimeter. "Maintain formation," he commanded, his voice tight with strain. "Do not break protocol. Observe. Document." He saw it then, a distortion in the air near the edge of the clearing, a shimmering heat haze effect, but cold, impossibly cold. It was the same visual anomaly Carter had witnessed, now manifesting on a terrifying scale. Suddenly, the mist surged forward, engulfing their perimeter. The sonic emitters sputtered, their whine faltering under the sheer pressure of the anomaly. The reflective shields offered little more than a psychological comfort against something that seemed to disregard physical barriers. Sharma felt a wave of disorienting nausea wash over her, the familiar pressure in her head intensifying. She saw Carter's cruiser, parked at the edge of the clearing, its lights flickering erratically, then dying completely, much like the equipment during his stakeout. Lee shouted, his scanner now emitting a frantic series of beeps. It's absorbing the energy. Our equipment is useless." The void pulsed again, and the very ground beneath them seemed to vibrate. For a terrifying instant, Sharma felt a disconcerting sense of displacement, as if her own consciousness was being stretched, thinned, pulled in multiple directions. This was not an attack, it was an environmental shift, a fundamental alteration of their reality by an indifferent force. Hayes, seeing their defenses faltering, made a decision. "Fall back. To the observation point. We need to disengage, observe from a distance." They retreated, a desperate scramble against an unseen tide. As they scrambled back towards the more stable ground near the observatory's main entrance, a small, abandoned car, its hazard lights still faintly blinking, appeared in the mist's periphery. It was as if the anomaly was actively rearranging elements of their surroundings, drawing from their experiences, their fears, their memories. They reached the relative safety of the observatory's shadowed alcove, the mist receding, the unnatural silence slowly giving way to the faint, returning sounds of the natural world. The stars, though still blurry, seemed to regain some of their sharpness. The void, the palpable absence, began to dissipate, leaving behind only a lingering chill and a profound sense of exhaustion. They had survived, but they hadn't won. They hadn't apprehended anything, hadn't even fully understood what they had faced. As the first tentative rays of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and gray, Hayes looked at his team. Their faces were pale, etched with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. They had faced the impossible, had glimpsed the architects of their unseen war. The victory was not in defeating the threat, but in enduring it, and retaining their sanity, and in the grim understanding that this was not an isolated incident. It was the beginning of a prolonged, clandestine conflict fought in the spaces between logic and reality, a war waged by those who saw what others could not, for the safety of a world that remained blissfully unaware. They say a law enforcement officer's duty is to the seen, the tangible. But sometimes, the most critical battles are fought in the unseen spaces, where duty transcends training and instinct becomes the only reliable guide. The truths we carry, the whispers no one else hears, bind us in a silent, shared vigilance against a world that refuses to stay within the lines. Thank you for joining us on Dusty Whisper as we explored the edges of the known. After hearing these accounts, if you found yourself in Officer Sharma's shoes, faced with the impossible choice between the official record and the undeniable truth you experienced, what would you do? Until next time, may your nights be quiet and your shadows still. Our next journey will delve into the chilling silence that followed their encounter, and the unsettling echoes it left behind.